Welcome everyone to Raku Raku Japanese, a podcast where I do not teach the Japanese but rather talk about my experience of learning this language and the journey I'm still in, and maybe share some tips and advice for those who are thinking of learning Japanese or already learning it. I am your host, Aidaana Hasanova. Hi everyone, this is another episode of Raku Raku Japanese. The topic of today's episode is also very fundamental. It is Japanese grammar, how to learn it, where to learn it, how to learn to use it, and so on. When it comes to grammar of the foreign language that you're learning, I think there are two teams of people, those who hate it and those who really enjoy it. I personally love grammar, especially Japanese language. It is interesting, flexible, complex, but also very logical as you will explore when you learn more and more grammar. And of course, it seems like very unique compared with other languages. So today, I would really love to share some insights about Japanese grammar that I have, and I hope they would really help you pick up or acquire grammar easier. I will also share the resources that I found useful and would recommend to you, and I will of course leave all the links of these resources in the description of our episode. When I started thinking generally about grammar learning, whether it's Japanese or not, like generally any language, I realized it is something not as definite and clear as we might think. I've researched a bit before recording this episode and found out several opinions and approaches that different people prefer when it comes to grammar. Some say that you shouldn't focus on grammar in textbooks and grammar rules that much, but rather you should more like do hands-on practice. I believe, on the other hand, there are people, either those who learn Japanese or teach Japanese, put a lot of emphasis on drilling grammar rules. Personally, I think that I'm somewhere in between. You see, in learning a language, there is both fluency and accuracy. So here, fluency refers to your ability to speak easily, quickly, and with few pauses, while accuracy means that you speak correctly with very few mistakes. So as you can see, both are important, and there are people with different levels of fluency and accuracy. For example, there are those who can speak fast and fluently in a foreign language, but they might be making some lexical or grammatical mistakes in general. Both fluency and accuracy are super important in my opinion. And here, for fluency, it is important not to get stuck in textbooks and all the grammar rules, but do a lot of practice of speaking. Yet to achieve a higher level of accuracy, I think it is still important to learn rules in grammar textbooks. Besides, it can also become very interesting. Here, I would recommend you a series of grammar books called A Dictionary of Basic Japanese Grammar, A Dictionary of Intermediate Japanese Grammar, and so on. There's also, I think, Advanced Grammar. You can choose any of this depending on your level. Currently, I'm using an intermediate one and I find it really useful. It is literally a dictionary of many Japanese expressions or grammatical constructs. First, they introduce the grammatical construct, for example, A kara B ni kagete. And the meaning is from A to B through A till B. Then there is a key sentence that shows how to construct a sentence with this grammar. And after, there are several examples of sentences that you can read to learn more about ways in which this grammar is used. I think this approach of learning grammatical constructs is really effective. But if you don't really like textbooks and rather prefer, for example, internet-based resources, there is a website that I can recommend to you called JLPT Sensei. There you can also find list of grammars, but divided into JLPT exam levels like N1 to N5. The structure is similar. You have a small grammatical topic, and then its meaning, the way of using it, and then examples of sentences. I use this website really often when I want to learn about the construct or expression that I don't know, or when I want to look up for some specific examples of usage when I'm not sure. But if you prefer videos for learning grammar, there is my all-time favorite YouTube channel, Masa Sensei's YouTube channel. She is a Japanese, but she explains in English on her channel. She has so many lesson videos, I think more than 230. In these videos, she teaches both grammar topics and Japanese expressions. You will get to know frequently used expressions as well as some grammatical constructs that you might not necessarily find in grammar textbooks. My recommendation how to learn is to write down all the examples that she lists. This way you can easily memorize the grammar rule. So this is it for the resources that I recommend for learning grammar. Now I would like to quickly share like 5 to 6 tips and insights about Japanese grammar. The first thing is learn casual and polite forms at the same time. As you might know, in Japanese there are 2 types of grammatical sentences, formal and informal. Generally, sentences that end with des, mas, or their forms in other tenses are polite or formal sentences. And knowing both of the formal and informal forms is important, and you will encounter them both in listening and reading a lot, so I think it is best to learn them side by side. The second insight is about conjugations. Japanese language, as you might know, is very heavy on conjugations, especially verbs. For example, if you have a dictionary verb, aka the casual basic form of a verb, yomu, which means to read, we can turn it into a potential verb, yomeru, can read, and then negate it, and it will become yomenai, which means cannot read, and then you put it into past tense and you will get yomenakatta, which means couldn't read. As you see, one conjugation piles on top of another. As a beginner, you should try to learn the rules of conjugations of different forms and tenses, and also for casual and polite forms. First, it is important to memorize. It might seem hard at the beginning, but the more you will practice speaking and writing, and the more you will hear Japanese speech, you will learn to use verbs naturally instead of recalling this conjugation table, these conjugation rules. For example, as you know, native speakers don't think about the rules when they talk because it all comes automatically and naturally to them because they have been hearing and speaking Japanese since childhood. The third tip is that reading helps a lot. Well, listening as well, especially for pronunciation, but according to some data, in 1 minute of reading, 1 minute of reading exposes students, learners to more sentences, to more grammar and new vocabulary than a video or a TV show. I'm not denying the importance of listening, I'm just saying that reading can offer a wider range of vocabulary and grammar. It also essentially supports and feeds the brain with the correct language structures that are important to have. The fourth tip is that you should understand the logic if you want to easily memorize the grammar rule. In Japanese, there are a lot of grammatical constructs that are important to know, and to better memorize them, there is one tip, which is understanding the logic of the grammar. When you understand the logic behind something, everything becomes much clearer and therefore easy to memorize and therefore use. For example, 勉強しなければなりません. First part is 勉強しなければ. If you learn this grammatical rule, it means if you don't study. And it kind of like negation of the potential form of the verb 勉強する. And the second part is なりません, which means it won't become. It is something that will not go, something that will not be accepted, or something like that. And there's actually the same logical construct in Kyrgyz language as well. For example, okuba-san bolboit, which also means I have to study. The fifth tip is that used or spoken Japanese can be different than the grammar that you have learned in a grammar book. For example, Japanese shorten a lot. We just talked about 勉強しなければなりません. But in fact, you will, I think, mostly see it in textbooks or hear it on JLPT listening tests, because in conversational or casual Japanese, they often say just 勉強しなきゃ or 勉強しなきゃいけない, or for example, 勉強しないと. So as you can see, the official form, the longer form, is more like used in textbooks or in exams, but in real life you will encounter like shorter forms that are easier to say and easier to use. And in fact, generally Japanese shorten a lot, both the whole expressions as we saw in the examples and the conjugations of words as well. So the tip is you should learn the official formal grammar, but at the same time be mindful and consider the contractions, aka like shorter versions of the same grammar rule that you have learned. Because from my listening experience, I have noticed that Japanese is much more flexible and that many things can be omitted. And as you probably know, in Japanese, pronouns are often omitted. For example, if you say, I will come today in English, but on contrary, in Japanese, you would just say, kyou kimasu without pronouns. The last and probably the most important tip, which is currently super important for me too, is that practice makes perfect. You can spend hours learning grammar or memorizing hundreds of grammar rules, but if you don't use them, for example, in speaking or writing is also very important for practicing grammar. And most importantly, here when it comes to practice is not to be afraid of making mistakes. Because I realized that when I say something in Japanese and when I make a mistake and then I learn that what I said is wrong, after checking it on internet, I kind of memorize the grammar rule better, and after that I would rarely make the same mistake again. So as you can see, practice is the most important thing when it comes to learning how to use grammar. So I think this is it for today's episode of Raku Raku Japanese, which was about grammar, about grammar rules, about the approaches to use to learn grammar, and some insights that I shared with you about generally Japanese language specifically. And so thank you for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for the next one.